Okay, so we're continuing on this week. We started last week looking at the presentation on the virtuous mental factors and continue on with that this week. So during the week, I happened to come across this program. It's quite interesting documentary about, we talked way back about, things like the placebo effect, nocebo effect. So the placebo effect being the positive one, and nocebo is when you don't believe it's going to work, so it doesn't, by the way. And studies that have been done in relation to the placebo effect and effects on the neural pathways, effects on the brain and on physical, mental, emotional well-being, and particularly the physical, I have to say, recovery and so forth. So they've found that in sense of well-being and neural pathways and so forth, that it was equally effective with placebos, even when people knew they were having placebos. So interesting. And it's showing the power of the mind, so that, and then I'd never heard about this, but sham surgery. So they've taken it into this area where, and even people know they're having sham surgery, not the real deal. There was people with back pain, I think, something like that. Anyway, so they were either injecting, like they normally do, giving the drugs or whatever treatment, and then, but also just going through the whole process, giving the injection, but not having the actual drugs, not having the actual treatment. And it had a profoundly positive effect on people's recovery, very little difference. And so now they come to the ethical dilemma of, well, are we cheating people, or are we, so sham or not sham? They're still doing both, or experimenting with both. And so part of the situation, I think, and this is really interesting, is that being in the medical situation, being with those people who are treating you just the same, whether you're having the placebo or the actual treatment, or the sham or the actual treatment, having all of those conditions and everything, being in that environment is a factor as well. So the conditions coming along there. But the main factor being the mind. And going beyond that, they started looking at the effect of positive states of mind. So the more positive your state of mind, guess what? The greater your recovery. And looking at different positive states of mind in terms of, they were looking at what we call genuine happiness, eudaimonia, but in the conventional sense of the happiness that comes from helping others, volunteering in a face-to-face way, not just sort of making donations, some vaguely overseas. I mean, they weren't saying stop doing that, but by engaging with community, engaging with others in a volunteering way, and that you're being of service to others. I mean, it totally aligns with what the Buddha taught. So that experience of happiness also contributes to recovery, and as we say, well-being, physical, mental, emotional. So it's exciting that they're doing those experiments, and particularly the experiences of awe, awesome, awe. AWE, not OR. Awe, wonder, amazement, that awe. And has a profound effect on our, well, they can measure the brain, but on well-being and uplift. And so encouragement to get the most awesome experiences you can, as often as you can, and see what happens with our minds, okay? So it's like, oh, cool, they're proving what the Buddha taught. It's very exciting. I don't know, I'm excited. I hope other people are. I find it fascinating that they're even doing those studies. I find fascinating. So they said, we've got so much more to learn. But isn't that wonderful? Oh, well, I think it is. Okay, so last week we started off looking at these virtuous mental factors as the sort of traditional Buddhist presentation. And so we looked at faith, and it produces a joyous state of mind, by the way. I'm going to be focusing on a bit on joy wherever it comes up. And so the next one along that we look at is a sense of self-respect or integrity. Often in the traditional text, it says shame, but people have all sorts of connotations about the word shame in terms of being ashamed. It's not that. It's this sense of, out of your own self-respect, we, for ourselves, that we refrain from, we hold back from destructive behavior. So it's an inward-looking mental factor, and so avoiding engaging in non-virtue and negativity as much as possible. Well, it doesn't say as much as possible, it says avoid it. In terms of our personal conscience, we wouldn't feel good about ourselves, enables us to, restrain ourselves from any harm, body, speech and mind. And it's the basis for our ethical conduct. So we can look at this in terms of living up to our own beliefs, our own values, abiding in vows, at whatever level of vows that we have, the individual liberation vows of either a lay person or an ordained person, bodhisattva vows, tantric vows, and so forth. Well, whatever level of vows we have, and our own ethical values. And I just remembered, actually, years ago, I worked for they were called National Industry Training Advisory Bodies, and it was the one for the arts, ITABs, the one for the arts. And it was all about the competency-based training and developing competency standards and so forth. And one of my colleagues, on her whiteboard, she had written up, the Dalai Lama doesn't have competency standards. And I love that. But one of my other colleagues didn't like it. So when this woman left the job, she rubbed it out. But, anyway, I think we'll say the Buddha set us quite a few competency standards, actually, when you come to think of it, just a different language. So we have this sense of personal conscience and refraining from that. And on the basis of vows, but also on the basis of understanding the law of karma, cause and effect, and thinking, of consequences for ourselves. This one is focused on ourselves, for ourselves, and taking responsibility for ourselves and our own actions, not blaming out there, taking that individual responsibility, as we say, let it begin with me. As Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, by myself alone. And they think, alone? Am I alone? Of course we're not alone, but having that sense of responsibility is what that means. Okay. So that's self-respect, integrity, shame, could have some other names to it. And then taking that further, the next one is consideration, or, this is the outward looking one, consideration for others, out of consideration for others. It's also called embarrassment. I'd be so embarrassed if I did that, if I acted like that, in terms of an embarrassment if other people see me acting in ways, particularly as an ordained Sangha, sort of, it's our job not to bring, well, we can say all of us as Buddhists, but when you're wearing the robes, it's not like you're representing something spiritual, even people don't know what it is, but that sense of not bringing Buddhism into ill repute, and so out of that sense, a sense of regard for others. And so this is restraining from those destructive actions out of their concern, being mindful of others and having, caring concern for others. So being aware of the effects of our actions on other people rather than totally focused on the effects of other people on us or situations on us, turning our regard outwards. Other people, other sentient beings in general. I had one time a rescue dog And I'd only had one dog before, and she was a big dog, and I had to learn to growl for her because she was a bit ADHD, to say the least. A very short attention span. But then I got this little rescue dog, and so I started treating her the same way with a firm voice, and she would cower. It was just like, okay, different strategy, different dog, different strategy. She was, you know, she didn't like the raised voice. I mean, I don't know what her backstory was in terms of where she came from, but I thought, oh, that's really terrifying for her poor little Liz. So change, you know, that sense of being aware, being mindful, and taking that sense of, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, universal responsibility, you know, not just for my own concern, but for others. And this then becomes on the basis of developing the, you know, 7-point cause and effect, cause and result, mind training of Arya Asanga, that Arya Asanga distilled and put in a very accessible way on the basis of seeing other sentient beings don't want to suffer, just like me. And so in that way, we're all the same. And then having a, you know, remembering that all sentient beings have been my mother. Every past life I've had a mother, and so I'm intimately connected with each and every one. So that brings them closer, and a sense of wanting to repay the kindness and reflect on the kindness of our own mothers or the person who's played that role in our life, and we can never get to the bottom of it. It just goes on and on and on. And so then we multiply that by every past life, and on that basis have a sort of affectionate love, regard of seeing the other sentient beings as attractive. And on the basis, because we've got to draw them close to us. In fact, this is the job of a bodhisattva in training, isn't it? To draw them close to benefit others. So, and having compassion. So the love and the compassion could arise, it is not in a set order. The compassion that says, I can't bear to see your suffering, like with my poor little itchy dog. Oh, it's too loud. I'm scared. So tone down and give her cuddles and, you know, whatever. That was an easy one to practice with the dog, as dog owners know. So, but then we get better at it and extend it out to others. So that love and compassion is the basis for having this sense of universal responsibility, consideration for others. And that is the basis of developing bodhicitta, you know, the mind of enlightenment. So this sense of consideration, cares about the effect of our actions on others, and avoids engaging in negativity for their sake. So the first one's for our sake, to maintain our own ethics and so forth, our values. And this one's for their sake, to restrain from harmful physical, verbal, mental actions. And this is the basis for maintaining our pure ethical conduct, and prevents others from losing faith in us. So as I was saying, you know, very important that, you know, as Buddhists, you know, if we're acting badly, you know, our family or friends are going, what sort of Buddhist are you anyway? If they know you're a Buddhist, it's like, question mark, what are you learning at that place? I have heard on the opposite hand that students coming and saying, my husband told me to come back to the center, to go back to the center, not come back because the husband wasn't coming, or whoever, my partner, my child, you know, substitute the appropriate. Causes joy, here we have, to arise in the minds of others. So think of that by our behavior of upholding ethics and so forth causes joy to arise in the minds of others. We can think of those that we've been inspired by because of their pure ethical conduct. And of course, we look at our lamas and so forth, but we can look at people in the news headlines, you know, that do amazing things, or, you know, out of a sense of responsibility for others. It's quite profound. You know, when I look at little 8-year-olds and so forth setting up non-profits, I was like, wow, you know, I certainly wasn't that 8-year-old myself. It's just amazing they can do. There's one story that sticks in my mind that's relevant here of Venerable Roger keeping a blog of Lama Zopa Rinpoche. This is when Rinpoche was traveling around. And so they stopped at this restaurant. The water has a beautiful aroma. Anyway, very delicious water. Thank you. From its own side, no. So caused me joy momentarily there. Thank you. So Venerable Roger tells this story. They were in a restaurant, and the waiter came to take their order, and he came over and he looked at Lama Zopa Rinpoche and said, "Love your outfit," and went away with the order. And Lama Zopa, because he has that clairvoyance, said to Venerable Roger, "Monk in past life." Yeah, interesting. So, of course, he couldn't remember I was a monk in past life. All he knew was he was attracted to the robes. He found them, so that was, a joyous experience for him. So having joy arise in the minds of others. Of course, I say if you can make your Lama laugh, that's the best. That's the best, make your Lama laugh in a joyful way, which is the only way they laugh.
Thubten talks about the smile of the Lama.
The smile of the Lama. Yeah, like the smile of the Buddha. The Buddha's always smiling at us, so we're always smiling back. They're very joyful, just the fact we're here. It's wonderful. And I thought, as I was preparing, I was thinking of a few other examples, like Chodron Rinpoche, His Eminence Chodron Rinpoche, when he first came to Australia and was leaving Sydney, I think, to come here, actually. And anyway, so we were waiting there at the airport, and there was this woman who was at the airport, and she was drunk, but she came running towards Chodron Rinpoche. She was so attracted by Chodron Rinpoche, and just, she wasn't Buddhist or anything, but just the energy, his energy. He's very, was a very quiet being. And she was just drawn. I thought, how fascinating. You never know who's going to be drawn. Maybe the fact that she was drunk, she was more uninhibited. She might have restrained herself from that if she wasn't. But there you go. She had a wonderful connection with him.
Did he respond?
Yeah, he was just very, like he responded to absolutely everyone else. Yeah.
I love him in the car.
Yeah.
I was terrified.
Terrified of it. Yeah.
Because he was so self-contained.
So self-contained. Yeah, just incredible. Yeah.
And I was new to the Dharma. I could feel power and I couldn't understand it.
Yeah. Huge power, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, just amazing.
I think Dharma's gone off next to him, he wouldn't have flinched.
No, just amazing. Anyway, so another example, when we were looking at the 12 links, we talked about, those who were here, the 12 links of dependent origination, the history behind that of, well, one of the stories of King Bimbisara, who was concerned about this other king, Udayana, who was a bit, so he was concerned that he was a bit too territorial and wanting to increase his territory and so forth. And so thought, well, I better make friends with him, right? And so cultivated a friendship via letters. And so they wrote and they wrote back and they developed a friendship, so somebody who's causing you problems. And then to the point that King Udayana gave a gift of an armor, suit of armor, made out of every single jewel was incredibly precious, and King Bimbisara was like, oh, what can I give in return, that could possibly be of this value? And I, cultivated this relationship, don't want to wreck it. He'll get angry. And then, other consequences. So anyway, so the upshot was, it was the time of the Buddha, and the Buddha, he went to the Buddha to to get the Buddha's advice, and consequently, he wanted an image of the Buddha. He thought, what else could there be? You know, there's nothing more superlative than that to offer. And so the Buddha, through his clairvoyance, could see that indeed, you know, this was appropriate to do, but nobody could draw the Buddha's image because of the power of that. So he cast his shadow and said, okay, on the cloth, and said, okay, draw that, and then put the 12 links, and then put the verse there. And it worked. So the Buddha was able to see through his clairvoyance that this was going to work. I mean, it could go the other way. It was, well, what are you doing me here? But it didn't. And King Udayana was just so overblown by this. So looking at, you know, that consideration for others, not what from my side, but, you know, what from their side is going to be a benefit. So there's lots of stories like that of someone that we regard as our enemy. What can we do to, what gifts can we offer them? Similarly, Jetsuman Tenzin Palmo, well, I first heard the story from her, many times heard from her, but other people tell the story of Saint Therese of Lisieux, who was at 14, wanted to ordain and did in fact ordain. So obviously her family let her at 14. Sometimes at 14 people say, no way, Jose, you know, you've got to work on the farm or whatever. Anyway, so she was able to ordain, and she ordained into a cloistered order. So in other words, here you are in lockdown for the rest of your life, basically. And there were about 30 nuns there. And when she'd go to prayers and so forth, there'd be this other nun who would make these weird random clicking sounds. And she started to develop an aversion for that and realized, you know, she built up this sense of aversion for this nun and started avoiding her, running into her anywhere and all of this. And then she realized, I've got to live the rest of my life with her. I've got to change. What can I do? And so she found out what she liked and gave her a gift. And the other nun says, I don't know why you're being so kind to me. And of course, the way Tenzin Palmo says is like, if only you knew why. But that's it gives us, if we place our focus on the consideration for the other one, then it totally shifts our perspective. And this is what it is, shifting the perspective from that stuck place to, oh, okay, I can change this dynamic. I can change. Everything's a dependent arising. Right? I mean, there's many stories. I just thought of another one, but oh, why not? Okay, one more. I remember Lama Zopa Rinpoche in the recent teaching. I'm not going to tell any more stories, and then a heap more stories come out. So following in that tradition. So it was a time in Sydney, and one of our teachers, I think, had got a brand new car and came out. I think it was one of the teachers anyway. Leslie probably knows. Came out and the car was keyed down one side, and then very unhappy. Next day, keyed down the other side. And a very wise elder, Dharma elder, had said, what would Lama Zopa Rinpoche do? Aha. Oh. So she went and bought a gift for the neighbour. She knew that he loved golf. And so she went and bought some golf balls for him. And went next door to offer them to him. And he cried. He said, oh, nobody's ever given me anything. And you might think, oh, well, with an, you know, attitude like yours, maybe why? But then the whole story came out of how he'd been in a concentration camp and, you know, his terrible background. And so that completely changed their neighbourly relationship. So it gives us different ways to think and to act. And you can think of your own examples. If you've got any to share, please do.
What would we do, Mr. Putin? Well, not what he wants.
Well, it's interesting, you know, when you think of in China, actually, no, when Lama Zopa Rinpoche was leading the Mani retreat at Chenrezig Institute, you know, over 20 years ago, And either from His Holiness, I think it was from His Holiness, there was a dedication prayer. May peace arise. Part of it was, may peace arise in the minds of the Chinese leaders. So whatever we can't make that happen, but that sense that, well, yes, if peace arose in the mind of Putin and all the others in the world, then the world would be very different, because a peaceful mind does not engage in conflict and war and so forth, right? I think you have to give him something amazing, massive, because I think all the, what do they call them? All the rich people in Russia are probably oligarchs. I was going to say oligarchs, and I said, well, do we call them oligarchs? And they probably have given them all the material things you could possibly give, and it doesn't seem to appease such a disturbed mind, So we can, all we can do is give compassion from our side. And he's not alone in the world. You've got to think everything's a dependent arising, So it's a state of this world. Which it comes from all the opposites to these, the non-virtuous mental factors, particularly in the, I always think of the Golden Light Sutra, where the Buddha predicted, a time when criminality is allowed in the land and by the leaders, let alone being perpetrated by the leaders, and the crops cease to flourish. There's an imbalance of the elements and there's increasing conflict. We talk about this as the time of, 5 degenerations, so degeneration of the environment, of the mind, more, and the body, physical, more mental and physical illness, and the environment, increasing conflict. In fact, the Buddha, His Holiness Dalai Lama, said, at the beginning of COVID, that and Lama Zopa Rinpoche as well, when Rinpoche was giving the transmissions of the sutras for COVID and against war and so forth, and we've been reciting those again now since the Ukraine war. That we are in this time of pandemic and then famine and war, where everyone's in conflict with everybody. And then, as His Holiness said, and then there'll be wind and fire, and that's the end of this world system. So we are in this time of decline, which means as Dharma practitioners, 2 things. One, it's more difficult. We have a lot more challenges. As Geshe Zopa says, objects of compassion, OCs. You make them your OC, your object of compassion. But it also means what Dharma we do practice and engage in is more powerful, because there's so much counterforce to that, right? So we can keep that in mind as well. Whatever we do is powerful in the world, even though we don't feel maybe that it is, Okay. So, and if you come up with the perfect gift for Putin, I think the whole world wants to know what that is. Do I say, give him Ukraine? No, because it won't stop there. Okay. Enough about politics. But we have to deal with realities of our time. So then, detachment or non-attachment. Often we say non-attachment because the word detachment as well, we have some different relationship with, as if it's a non-caring attitude. I mean, some people might. But I like non-attachment because it's like you have to work on that mind. So a state of mind able to step back from an object of attachment, and there, by creating that gap between ourselves and the object of desire, it is itself is an antidote to that attachment. So here, our human experience, we live in a desire realm. So we are just propelled, the desires propel us, and advertising companies are very good at hooking into that energy of desire, making you want things you never wanted in the first place, or, I mean, as a nun, I'm quite content, you know, mind of contentment is what this is. And then, you know, and then you go to the shopping centre, half price, closing down, you know, one time only. And of course, I don't, and I'm talking as someone who doesn't go to clothes shops and, you know, a whole bunch of shops. I'm just talking the supermarket. Well, maybe the supermarket's not closing down, but you know what I mean. And what is it? End of financial year, end of line, end of anything, beginning of something, whatever. So we can see how that desire energy arises. And as the Lama's operate, Rinpoche says, go there and just observe that, but, you know, keep your wallet in your pocket. Just notice. It's a practice. So it allows us to sort of see through those compulsions, those desires, if left unchecked. You know, if left unchecked, we get a sense of, you know, this attraction of the senses, and that triggers then the desire, and then unchecked leads to craving, leads to grasping, leads to obsession, leads to addiction. Then we've got big problems, isn't it? So we look at that, we investigate that, so that if we can counter that through non-attachment to those objects, then we're able to have a more spacious mind, a more relaxed mind, a more open mind, and engage in more fruitful pursuits. We're already doing that. We're here. We're here engaging in the Dharma. So we've got to investigate how these states of mind cheat us and lie to us and tell them they're, you know, sort of going to bring us all this happiness that we know is only ever temporary. So, you know, we've got to familiarize ourselves with, you know, our own manifest desires. That's easy, but the latent desires, you know, just every moment of the day, you know, we're having pleasant sensations, we're having unpleasant sensations. We go towards the pleasant, we want more of this, you know. Oh, it's cold, I don't want to get out of under the snuggling doona and so forth. We know we have to eventually get up, but yeah. Okay. So non-attachment, not just the mere absence of attachment. In other words, it's an action step, a direct antidote to attachment. Attachment to any object. So we investigate what are my danger zones, people or places or items to, you know, sort of uplift the senses. So it prevents that and it subdues that obsession. So then, you know, we talk about to develop something like shamatha, calm abiding, single point of concentration meditation, if we really want to sort of put our energy towards that, to have a mind of few needs. This is this non-attachment, of having few needs and of having a mind of contentment, at ease. It's a very spacious mind, and then we can turn to more beneficial pursuits. So we really investigate, and it's quite nice when I hear people come in and go, well, I looked around at home and I'm not attached to anything in my house. Great. What about your smart device? Or whatever. I mean, we have to interrogate our mind, because there'll be something, there'll be more than one thing. So we can check up, and this is not to beat ourselves up, just to be aware. We're living in the desire realm. It's a danger zone. Whole of samsara is a danger zone. Oh, sorry, yes.
Does it matter if the attachment is about like an enabler, like a sewing machine so that you can make things, or like a car so that you can drive people?
Well, would you call that an attachment? So we're talking about attachment instead of the mind of desire, rather than I've got these resources to use to benefit others. It's functional.
Oh, good, thank you.
It's a functional, it's a utility. But, you know, it's very interesting you say car, because it reminds me of a dear Dharma friend who is obsessed with cars. Like, she used to pick me up from the airport and say, I'm going to bring the blah, blah car, whatever it was. I didn't mind. I just wanted to get from A to B, you know. And, but she was like totally obsessed with it. And what was interesting, karma, haha, pun there, yeah, was she ended up in this situation where she bought a new car and absolutely everything was wrong with it. And the car, yeah, it wasn't, you know, they fought it. And I mean, eventually they paid her out, but it took a long time. And I just thought, isn't that a lesson about attachment? You know, just let go of the attachment to this car, cars in general. It's interesting. I mean, we can have, well, we do, we can name our own object of attachments. Books and iPhones, there you go. MacBooks and iPhones. We're not plugging anybody here, by the way. Yeah. So then, okay, non-attachment, then the opposite. So that's the mind of desire. That also, in terms of craving, I remember, you know, in terms of addiction and craving, I remember reading a story, I think, I'm not sure if it was in Mandala or another magazine, and it was a woman who had met the Dharma, recovered from addiction, and her description of what it was like in the addiction, she described as, this is the hungry ghost realm. This is this mind of craving that never gets enough, never satisfied, and so forth. So it is the cause for that. This desire, you know, grasping is the cause for having that sort of a rebirth, or we can say rebirth or experience, psychological experience in the very body you have. But you recover. It's a good thing. Thanks to the Dharma. Well, she attributed it to the Dharma. But, okay, so the opposite mind, non-hatred, which is the antidote to hatred, anger, aversion, which we also say is characterized by loving kindness. It's the total opposite, you know, directed at specific objects. And so that, you know, the wish that others have happiness, and the object, someone who's harming us, or the harm that's done, that we receive, or the cause of that, the instrument of that. And the example here is weapons. So, of course, in Bodhisattva's way of life, it's just like, why get angry with the stick that hit you? Somebody wielding a stick. They're saying, well, why? No. First of all, why not get angry with the stick? Because it was the stick that hurt you. The person might have been holding it, but it was the stick that hurt you. And then it's like, well, why get angry with a stick? And I remember as a child, you know, when I'd fall over on the path, and my mother would, and I'd be upset, and my mother would say, just smack the path, because the path hurt you. But I needed that part. I also needed the ground to get me up. So, but as a child, that worked for me for a short period of time. And so that's a sort of childish response. Okay, fine. But as adults, we can go further than that. And in fact, in Bodhisattva's way of life says, if you're going to get angry with the anger itself, like turn the affliction on itself. That's, you know, if you must get angry, turn it on the affliction. In other words, work on yourself, right? So just a couple of verses from Bodhisattva's way of life in relation to this. It's from chapter 4, which is guarding conscientiousness. And so verse 45 and 47, common enemies, when expelled from one country, simply retire and settle down in another. So we're talking about military here. I mean, we're seeing this play out with Russia. Simply retire and settle down in another, though when their strength is recovered, they then return. But the way of this enemy, my disturbing emotions, the way of this enemy, my disturbing conceptions, is not similar in that respect. Like it doesn't retire, it just grows and grows and grows. So turn it upon itself. And then if these disturbing conceptions do not exist, this is more, you know, we can use the sort of emptiness meditation, not sort of, emptiness meditation, think, well, where is this disturbing conception? It doesn't exist within that object, the stick or the ground, whatever. It doesn't exist there. It doesn't exist within my sense organs that perceive that, because sense organs only have direct perception. They don't have conceptual mind. They just hear or see or feel, taste, touch, smell. Then where do they exist and how do they harm the world? So we're interrogating, where is it? So they're like an illusion. So we use all these different ways. So a magical illusion, like they're cheats, they're lies, they're not real. So I should dispel the fear from within my heart and strive resolutely for wisdom. For no real reason, as in valid reason, why should I suffer in so much hell? In other words, I'm creating this for myself. And to realize that it's the hell of my own mind right here, right now, or as the addict said, the hungry ghost realm of her mind right then. So we interrogate and we let that go. So non-hatred, the opposite of animosity. So it's a harmonious, peaceful state of mind. It is love and benevolence. So a sense of well-meaning, kindly, patience. So when you look at, the whole chapter 6 of Bodhisattva's Way of Life, it gives you every permutation of looking at applying patience, which with loving kindness is an antidote to that mind of aversion. Having courage in pain, courage when we're experiencing illness or adversity, whether that be from someone else, and patience with our Dharma practice with ourselves, because we can get frustrated with ourselves as well. Hopefully not hatred. Hopefully not hatred. So characterized by love, directly overcomes anger and hatred, preventing hostility and the increase of love, benevolence, forgiveness. Like one of the guys who runs workshops now in North Carolina in prisons from the Dharma Center, he runs these workshops on forgiveness for the people in prison. And this was from his own experience of non-hatred. This is very powerful. He started out, he went to visit the person who had killed his son and forgive him. And he said, because in his mind, as a Dharma practitioner, his grief and pain was going to finish, but the perpetrators was intense and going to keep increasing. So on that basis, having forgiveness. And so now he runs these workshops on that. Oh, it's powerful, isn't it? Taking it into... Yes, because it's very difficult to forgive yourself. It's very challenging for them. It's like, if you've always been told, I'm a bad person, you believe I'm a bad person. I remember one guy when Candrela went to visit a prison here and said, you mean it says here, I can be a bad person and a good person in the same lifetime. Is that true? So his whole concept of himself is, I'm a bad person. And I said, sure, you can be a good person and a bad person in the same minute. Oh no, that's too much, But it gave him something to think about. Oh, I could reframe that and actually, where innately these positive qualities are innate to us. But can be very habituated, like he was, to a self-concept that was very much, and you've probably been told that since you not encouraged in his positive qualities and being told he was bad, and then he ends up in prison, and that validates that, and then the treatments, and reinforces that. So forgiveness and fortitude, which is sort of like strength, So, okay. Yes, Michelle.
I find this the most challenging with people who have mental illness?
Yes. To have, to work with them or to,
Well,
please explain.
for example, one of our family members' spouses has a mental illness, and it's almost like practicing the Dharma is almost like putting your hand in the beehive over and over again.
Yeah, so sometimes we can be overwhelmed. We're trying to be good Dharma practitioners and doing the virtuous thing, but can be confronted, particularly if it's a family member, because we're close and we maybe interact with them more than with others. So that not to get overwhelmed and to set boundaries around that. Okay, I can have for this amount of time, I can practice, and that's why, you know, we can find those. This is why it says start with those you're already got that sort of unconditional love towards, because, you know, when people talk about their object of compassion, it's the same one they love, you know. It's like, oh, the one I love is also my main object of compassion, because we know how to push each other's buttons, isn't it? So we start with ones that are easy and build up our capacity to do that. And so you still have to interact with this person and just go, okay, well, I'm making progress. I'm working on it. We're all works in progress, you know. So little baby steps towards that. Don't expect perfection. Not yet, anyway. Eventually. A few eons to go, maybe, certainly for me. And so this is an interesting example, you know, experiment that was done. In a simple experiment, researchers at the University of Chicago sought to find out whether a rat would release a fellow rat from an unpleasant, restrictive cage if it could. This is a bit like the Buddha's working for, and Bodhisattvas working for our benefit, you know, like releasing us from the prison of samsara. We don't even recognize we're in a cage, right? But they do, they see our suffering. So that's that motivation. But here we're talking about a rat. The answer was yes. The free rat, often hearing distress calls from its compatriot, learned to open the cage and did so with greater efficiency over time. So seeking contact, but also not bearing the distress of its fellow rat, right? So, yeah, so it would release the other animal even if there wasn't the payoff of a reunion with it. So it wasn't like, I want to get together with this, right? I don't know, you know, whatever. But so therefore, it wasn't from a self-centered motivation. Clearly, it wasn't from a self-centered motivation. It was, you know, concern for the fellow rat. And on top of that, astonishingly, if given access to a small hoard of chocolate chips. Now I was thinking, I don't know if chocolate chips are good for rats, but then I thought a rat's diet is probably full of, it might be, I thought, yeah, there might be more nutritional value in the chocolate chips than anything else it's been eating. The free rat would usually save at least one treat for the captive. So at least one, okay. At least one. It wouldn't say, no, mine, go away. I freed you. That's the end of the story. So in some ways we can say this really challenges our perception of rats, isn't it? There you go, being kind to its fellow rat. I don't think they tried it with a mouse and a rat.
They're supposed to be quite intelligent rats, aren't
they? Yeah, they're supposed to be quite intelligent rats. Yeah. So this ties into the questions that His Holiness the Dalai Lama asked about, well, where does compassion kick in? You know, clearly the rat had compassion for its fellow rat. So as His Holiness says, mammals definitely have, you know, have compassion. So it's good to look, you know, as His Holiness was interrogating, well, let's look at evolution. Single-celled amoeba, not sure, just not sure. Probably not sure. Mosquitoes, His Holiness said, definitely not. Definitely not. But, you know, mammals, definitely, yes. There's evidence, isn't it? So quite interesting. Okay, then next one, non-confusion, or we call non-ignorance. We talk about, you know, the root ignorance. I like the one confusion because it just totally gets everything wrong, confuses everything, like a brain fog, you know. It's the antidote to confusion and ignorance is non-confusion, or we would say wisdom. It arises from listening, reflection, and meditation. So these indeed we call wisdoms of themselves, the wisdom of listening, listening to the Dharma teachings, the wisdom arisen from reflecting on that, reading about it, reading commentaries, discussing, debating, looking at it from every single angle you can possibly look at it from. And then taking that into meditation and having a direct experience of that. So there are many, many different forms of wisdom, the wisdom of realizing impermanence, and so lots of wisdoms. I think this was something that I first encountered in Buddhism, that wisdom wasn't just one thing, you know, there are many, many different forms of wisdom. So here we're looking at the you know, primordial, if you like, wisdom that totally cuts the root of samsara. And as it says, it can also arise from an inborn predisposition to intelligence and wisdom that understands something, even a little bit, something about the true nature of reality. So this inborn predisposition to intelligence and wisdom, you can say we all have. Here we've come into this life and connected with the Dharma, I'd say reconnect with the Dharma, even though we might be useful to have remembered some of that. I know I've been coming along to the Tibetan classes on Saturday morning, and if I ever had any imprints of Tibetan, they're certainly not there now. I don't know. Or well, the imprints might be there, but they're certainly thickly clouded by ignorance and confusion. Thickly clouded by that. But because we are here, and because we do have some sense, little chink window into the nature of reality, at least we've heard the true teachings and we don't dispute that and say, I might not completely understand it, but I'm not disputing it at the same time. So think about that. So we can think that, you know, we already came into this life with that quality and just needed that reconnection of encountering the Dharma, which we probably made strong prayers for in the first place, and here we are. So we encountered before. And then it's developed, cultivated, because we could come into this life with that, but do nothing with it. But then because we've met the Dharma and we keep going, we develop it, we cultivate it, we nurture it by study, reflection, and meditation, developing those wisdoms. Non-confusion acts as a remedy for confusion and ignorance and accompanies the firm wisdom that thoroughly analyzes the nature and specific characteristics of an object, the unique characteristics of an object. And so this is where we apply it to investigating the lack of inherent existence of this I that I grasp at to be truly existing from its own side, or same with observing the object to be permanent, unchanging, independent, and so forth. So investigate by nature of the two truths, the conventional reality, looking at from all angles and getting a better understanding of the Buddha's unique teaching on dependent arising, dependent origination, dependent on causes and condition on its parts, and merely labeled, that's the most subtle one. And then the emptiness of inherent existence that arises at the same time as the object arises. So applying those both. So then as we familiarize more and more with that, it prevents more and more the confusion we have, the ignorance we have. So when we're confused about anything, we have so many tools of meditation, analytical meditation, points to meditate on, to dispel that confusion, to increase our clarity, to increase our certainty. There's many ways we can apply thorough analysis, and helps us to actualize constructive qualities. In fact, all our constructive qualities. Okay. All of them. So that's the non-confusion, non-ignorance. And then we have the virtuous mental factor of enthusiasm or joyous effort. The word joy has arisen. So it's not making effort of, which we may often have. Yes, I know I should practice more. I know I should meditate. I know, using the big stick. Joyous enthusiasm, which is said that just the fact that we want to listen to the Dharma, we want to understand more, we want to apply it in our lives and so forth, is itself that we sort of went, oh, wow, there's a teaching, or, and so forth, or teaching online, teaching in the Gompa, is itself a result of, vast accumulations of merit from past lives that we can't see, but it is because of that. And that gives us that sort of sense of joy, so a sense of diligent, which is persistent effort, as his Holiness says, never give up, never give up. So having this joyous effort, enthusiasm, because we have to continually refresh our enthusiasm regarding virtuous activity. It sounds a contradiction that we have to re-enthuse ourselves about virtuous activity, because if it is what makes us feel good, why wouldn't we want to do more and more? It's just, the well-developed ruts of habits of the opposite. Okay. So essential for making progress on our spiritual path. So it's careful, persistent, and again and again and again working at it joyfully, because it takes a lot to counteract those habits, isn't it? To shift our maybe laziness, distraction, and all the toxic emotions. We can just check our own mind, the challenges that we have. So it acts to generate, or let's say wake up, our constructive qualities, because they are there, but it's like got to wake it up. So generate those not yet generated, those not awakened, and those that have, to bring to completion. So when we say completion, it means we need this joyous effort. And think in terms of presentation of the 6 perfections, it comes after patience. So we've got to have patience to keep going and with our Dharma practice, and then the joyous effort to keep us going to completion is a few eons. If we think about the Bodhisattva paths and grounds, completing the Bodhisattva grounds in which we complete, in other words, perfect, the perfections of generosity, of ethical discipline, of patience, of joyous effort, concentration, wisdom. So, yeah. So that's in our enthusiasm, joyous effort, which better than a placebo. Just think about that. Maybe even better than the drugs. I'm not saying give up your medication. I never say that to anyone. And then, okay, next one. Suppleness or pliancy or flexibility. So we talk about this usually in relation to cultivating shamatha, single point of concentration, but the cultivation of shamatha, and that one of the signs of that is having this flexibility or pliancy. But we can have flexibility in our mind right now, in fact, hopefully we do, and cultivate that. When Lama Zopa Rinpoche, I remember one time at Lamp on the Path talking about Guru devotion and talking about, all of I hear different numbers of Lama teachers, 150, 160, so forth, and then, but the main ones. And so, but as Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, the more flexible your mind, the more teachers you can have. The more rigid your mind, just one. So, and the main thing is, it's not a judgment. It's just that we need not to get more confused. So if we have one teacher that we follow, the advice and put it into practice. We don't need more, we could say, but we don't want to get confused either. So, we can look at our lamas and see they've got a lot of teachers, but they're for specific different teachings or whatever, And Lama Zopa Rinpoche's example, keeping certain lineage alive or reviving and so forth. So there's different purposes for different teachers. It's not just, I'll try someone else and see if I get a better response. Leslie.
I mean, those qualities would have to be, situation dependent. Like I'm thinking, if you're trying to do a solitary retreat,
Exactly.
you can't be too flexible. You just go back. No, I'm going to do this. I don't feel well this morning, but I'm going to get up at 6 o'clock.
Yes. Yeah.
Once your flexibility comes in, the whole thing.
Oh yeah, it's not that sort of flexibility of like, oh, whatever. It's a good point. It's not that type of mind. It's developing a more spacious, open mind that can say, well, I don't feel like getting up, but I've signed up for this deal and I'm getting up. I'm doing my retreat. Rejoice in that.
I think you need flexibility of mind too as you age and the body
Doesn't do what it used to do. The body doesn't do what it used to
in my
do.
case anyway.
Yeah. That's why I'm looking forward to the promise of physical flexibility at some point. Would be
But
nice.
it's also that mental.
It is the mental. Yeah. It's mainly mental. It's mainly mental. Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact,
and your power weakens though as an older person. When I look
yes.
at my dad, it's so horrible. Isn't it?
Yeah.
Everybody has to learn.
And actually, this is what I found when I, many years ago now, did the Feldenkrais training, which is based on the body and looking at how literally it was in relation to the body, but then, happened to pursue further to the mind, which I'm very grateful. But, that we place physical limitations on ourselves. That was one thing. Of course, we do age and certain things of the body, but also the idea of not just doing things one way. Have you got 3 different options for how to, and this was just on the basis of the body, to how to physically move. Say you've got a frozen shoulder, you're going to be doing from the pelvis. I learned that when I had frozen shoulders. So for driving, it's like 2 aching necks. So, I learned to turn from here, which was actually better for the body. So opening up different options, that sort of flexibility, or flexibility to changing circumstances, like when His Holiness was asked when Y2K, well, what's going to happen? The world's going to come to an end, Y2K is going to happen, it's going to come to an end. And so, no problem, just go somewhere else. Like having the flexibility to think differently, to reframe it. And yeah, that sort of flexibility. That actually enhances then our meditative concentration. It's the basis for that, enhances that. And for the sublime awareness that comes from our analytical meditation, particularly wisdom realizing emptiness, a special insight. And then combining the two. So, there's extensive teachings on that in the Lamrim Chenlo, Great Treatise on the Path, Lama Tsongkhapa, Volume 3, and Pabonka Rinpoche on that. So, having that flexibility of our mind, because changing circumstances in the world all the time, and rather than get frustrated, oh, that's changed, because what do we know? Everything's impermanent, subject to change, from the very subtle level to the very manifest, obvious level. But we don't like it.
It's frightening.
Some of it's very frightening, isn't it? And yeah. Okay. So it sort of frees us up from being narrow-minded, from stubbornly holding on to particularly wrong views, wrong conceptions, because we're not going to ever get very far then. So cultivating this sense of an open mind, spacious mind, unobstructed, you know, and based on mindfulness. I like the idea of the mind being full of, you know, 100% mindfully, mind to fully engage in virtuous activity, filling our whole mind with engaging in virtuous activity, you know, whatever way we can, right? So it's a very spacious state of mind. So I think, Leslie, the sort of flexibility we're talking about, I'd probably label laziness. It'd probably come in one of the categories of laziness or procrastination, wouldn't it be? You know, oh yeah, I'll do it later. You know, putting it off to later. We're all so this, and this is where the enthusiasm counteracts that. The joyous effort counteracts that state of mind. So we might have to combine that in there too. So it's good to question and think, well, when would I need to use whatever virtuous mental factor and be appropriate to the situation? Okay. All right, so next one, conscientiousness. So I also looked this up in the dictionary because I always find it interesting to see how we present it in the Buddhist definition and how it's presented in the sort of conventional dictionary. Anyway, I didn't look very far, I just Googled. Wishing to do one's work or one's activity well. So this conscientiousness that we fully engage with it, like Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, not just blah, blah from the lips, you know, from the heart, this conscientiousness that loves whatever's virtuous and protects our mind because of that, from engaging in delusions, destructive actions, even recognizing them in the first place is the first step. So maintaining a certain peace, equanimity. And so conscientiousness values the accumulation of virtue. And this is where, just harking back to joy, is that emphasis to take joy in that, delight in that, and enhance our conscientiousness that guards the mind, that gives rise to afflictions. It prevents that. So it's like we put on an armor that prevents, as it says, the pollution coming in, protects the mind from pollution. It brings to fulfillment and maintains all that is good. So we can think all our good qualities and virtues that we work hard at developing, and is the route for attaining all grounds and paths. So it's crucial, you know, when we talk about the 10 bodhisattva grounds and the 5 paths, path of accumulation, path of preparation, path of seeing, path of meditation, path of no more learning, Buddhahood, ta-da. Doesn't quite come as quickly as that, unfortunately. So everything that we've been discussing here, this sense of conscientiousness, as it says in the, Geshe Langpa Trungpas, in the 8 verses of thought transformation. And I know we have a different translation at the moment, but vigilant. So it's this vigilant. The moment a delusion arises in my mind, I confront and avert it without delay. That's this conscientiousness that does that. Okay. Then this mind of equanimity. So here we're talking about mental quiescence or mental balance. Sometimes I hear the Lamas say, let it abide in equanimity. In other words, don't let it disturb your mind. Of course, if it's something we can do something about, as Shantideva said, do it, you know, why worry? But if it's something we can't do something about, why worry? So this mind of equanimity. So it allows, it's the antidote to mental excitation and mental dullness. So we look at these two factors, which are when we're in, developing, say along the 9 stages of shamatha, for example. These are the two main obstacles to developing single point of concentration, is this mental excitation and mental dullness. And at sometimes one is more manifest than the other, and we work at it and get to control a coarse level, the most manifest level, and then more and more subtle levels, and it takes quite some time. But we need to have this mental quiescence, this mental balance to do that, to support the mind to settle and remain focused on a virtuous object. Okay, so this is distinction here. It's not the same one we use, meaning of equanimity that we use when we talk about that 7-point cause and effect, where we see the even regard towards all beings, this sense of equanimity. So it's a different sense where we see, oh, just like me, all other beings don't want to suffer. Just like me, they want to be happy. In that way, we're equal. So it's not that one. It's this mental quiescence that's not distracted. And that is a foundation and basis to develop single point of concentration, shamatha. It's a state of mind free from attraction and aversion. Okay. And then next one, which is sort of the last one, non-violence, which is, or non-harmfulness, non-cruelty. So here we can see, Gandhi had that whole movement, ahimsa, of non-violence, that he made very much the foundation of his goals for India. And he demonstrated that as well through his own practice. And so a mind completely free of any inclination to do harm, not just not doing harm, but even any thought to do harm. Not a non-violent mind. Also, on top of that, can't bear to see the suffering that others experience. And on the basis of that, because of feeling that connection with others, the thought of doing harm doesn't arise. And so even we do find ourselves doing harm unintentionally, we sense a distress about that. Oh, I'm that little insect that I didn't see. What can I do? What can I do? And then do it. Okay. So, so it's akin to compassion, the wish that others be free of suffering. And as his Holiness Dalai Lama, this is what's most needed in the world. In fact, if we look at all the Buddha's teaching, the whole Buddha Dharma, it's two things. One, the philosophical view of dependent origination, interdependence. And the other thing on a practice level is the practice of non-harmfulness, non-violence. And as the Buddha said, do no harm, subdue your mind. And if you can, on top, benefit others. So it all comes down to this. Okay. So lacking any intention to cause harm, it wishes all sentient beings to be free from suffering and prevents disrespecting or harming others. It prevents us doing that because it's not in our mind. And this is where His Holiness said, if peace could arise in the minds of those leaders, then there's no wish to do harm. Whereas His Holiness says, if all children learn to meditate at an early age, peace would arise in their mind, peace in the world, done. It's simple, but not easy, right? Yes, Michelle.
I've noticed that in myself, probably in the room, over the last 10 years. Things that I would have observed and let disturb my mind, maybe still been irritating me for weeks, like, over 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Now I'll recognise, catch, and
you catch it quickly, quicker.
And it will, cause disturbance, but it'll stay there very temporarily. Yeah. And if it comes back, I still have that sense of, you know, I didn't do any harm in that situation. I could,
Yeah.
you know, I could have reacted
Yeah.
differently. I recognised, I stepped away, and there's nothing we can do now. And the disturbance goes. It's really wonderful.
That's great. I mean, and that's a result of practice and, you know, so putting the Dharma into daily life, that we can take a step back and look at, oh, where I would have 10 years ago, maybe caused the harm, planned the revenge, whatever, blah, blah, or when I see them, I'm going, you know, whatever. Now, even if those thoughts arise, they dissipate more quickly. Yeah, which is great. That's a result of practice. And then, yes, delight in that, rejoice in that. So we end with joy, we begin with joy, we end with joy. All righty. Which brings us to the end of this morning. And we will dedicate all our joyous efforts. What page is it? 17, under the Idam Guru Ratna. Devadi no hodo dadla mahasange drudyone drowa chikyam mahalupan ne sahala Nguho Pasho Janchub Sencho Grimposhe Makye Panam Ge Kuchi Ge Wanyam Pame Payam Gome Gondu Pelwashu. Page 19 for long life prayers. We can do in English. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And of course, on Wednesday, it's His Holiness Dalai Lama's 87th birthday. We're going to be celebrating here on the Saturday because the Tibetan community are coming along and cooking up a storm. So I think if you're coming for that, we're asked to put in, you know, let the office know for numbers, for catering. And so we'll have all our celebrations and puja then after our retreat, winter retreat morning. Okay, page 22, long life prayer for Kyabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serves as a bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjana's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplishes magnificent prayers, honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please live long and long life for Tenzin Osul. Lord of Dharma, who in accordance with the various dispositions of those to be subdued, makes clear in the light of your well-spoken advice the sacred Ganden tradition, essence of Buddha's teachings, O foremost and holy Lama, to you who are supreme. O Lama, please, please live long. Okay, thanks everyone.